Hey, Nader, welcome.
Hey, how's everyone doing? Thank you for having me and pleasure to be here and kind of looking forward to this presentation.
Yeah, I think everyone is. It's kind of an exciting talk. I think, well, as Sander said earlier, it's definitely something that was kind of a no-brainer for us to pick. Definitely sounds exciting. So let us know when you're ready. We'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, let's do it. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, I guess.
Sure, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So should be able to see my screen now. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get going because we have a lot of stuff to cover. My name is Nader Dabit. I am currently working with a team, or I would say company, but it's less of a company, more of like a team called Edge and Node. And you could kind of, in my opinion, think of it as kind of like a Web3 company for sure, but almost different than maybe most of every company I've ever even been exposed to in the past. And I'll talk a little bit more about like, what we're doing and stuff in just a moment. But I've been in developer relations for almost 4 years now. My past was 3.5 or so years at Amazon Web Services, leading the front end web and mobile team developer advocacy there. And then I kind of moved into this area once I started playing around with some of the stuff that I'm going to be showing you today. So Edge and Node, we do a couple of things. We support a protocol called the Graph Protocol as engineers. And that's one of the many various Web3 protocols that are out there that are basically providing some sort of web infrastructure for a lot of the decentralized apps and stuff that are out there today. We also create dApps within the ecosystem. So we're building out a couple of interesting ideas. We do things like awareness. So that's probably the main thing that I focus on is I create content, I teach, and I do all types of presentations on Web3 to kind of help people understand what it means and all of these things, because it's kind of like a weird broad term when you first hear it. And we also invest. So like if we find interesting projects, we invest in those teams and we collaborate with them and we help them out. And yeah, so it's a really, we do quite a few things and it's a lot of fun. But the main protocol that we work with is the Graph, and the Graph is an indexing protocol for querying data from decentralized data sources. So in the traditional web world, if you need an API or a database, it's fairly easy to kind of get up and running with that at this point. You just spin up a database, maybe in a cloud, you put an API layer on top of it. You might even use something like Supabase or Amplify or Hasura or whatever these managed services are that kind of put all this stuff together for you. And indexing is kind of built into the databases that we're used to. So SQL and NoSQL databases, that's kind of what they do. They index data. But in blockchain, that's a lot different because you have these series of transactions that have been created over time, sometimes years of transactions. So while you can go and query a single item from a blockchain, you cannot do rich queries, you can't do filtering, you can't do sorting, you can't do relational data. So typically, you have a hard time getting anything past a very basic query. So with the Graph protocol, we have a decentralized network of participants that basically run different indexing servers that make data available via GraphQL. And there are incentives that are put in place that kind of create a truly decentralized network that is trustless and that is has very high uptime. And a lot of companies and a lot of teams in the ecosystem are using it. So that's the Graph. But I'll tell you a little bit about what I've done, because I mentioned that I moved from AWS to a team called Edge and Node that was really only started maybe a month before I decided to join, a brand new team. But they had been working on that protocol that I mentioned earlier, the Graph protocol, for years. So the team itself wasn't new, the company was new. And when I say Web 2 and I say Web 3, like what does this stuff mean? I'll do a quick overview. And basically the term Web 3 and Web 2 and Web 1, like some people like it, some people hate it. But I think it's a good way to be able to kind of categorize the paradigms that we've been through in the web. And I also do think that the stuff that's happening right now deserves to be put in a separate category. So Web 3, everyone's using it. That's kind of what I use as well. Web 1, Web 1.0, you could think of it as like the read-only web. There were a lot of like informational websites, but there was a high barrier to entry for creation. If I wanted to create a website, I had to be a developer. And therefore, there wasn't as much creation happening, right? And I think when you think about the category of Web 2, that was more where creators had a lot more control, and people were building out interfaces on top of applications that allowed anyone to be a creator. So social media is definitely the perfect example. Blogs, wikis, images, video sharing, anything, even Twitter could be definitely considered Web 2. But there were a lot of great things about Web 2.0, but there are also a lot of things that people are not crazy about, right? The most important ones typically being around advertising and data integrity. How most companies like create their businesses off of the backs of their customers' data and tracking and things like that. But also it doesn't give creators a good way to leverage the platform to monetize themselves. So a creator might gain 10 million followers or even 100,000 followers or whatever, or even just 1,000 followers. And let's say you want to actually do something with all of that work and effort that you've done. You a lot of times are left with options like advertising stuff, like, advertising stuff for other people. You might be able to create a book or something like that and sell that to them, but there isn't a ton of value there. Most of the value, most of the money goes to the platform. So therefore you see these platforms being multi-billion-dollar or 10 or $100 billion companies, because all this money is flowing directly through the creators into the actual corporations. And Web3 offers a new way to kind of build applications that we're starting to kind of see really take off, honestly, in the last couple of months, and actual creator benefits. And I think what we're going to see over the next 1 to 3 years is going to be a rethinking of how social media works. And I do kind of see a Web3 based social media company kind of like being the killer app that kind of lets a lot of people understand like how all this stuff works if they haven't already dived into it yet. So, but some of the characteristics that you might hear when people talk about Web3 are this. It's decentralized web, where, instead of all of the ownership being centralized into a single organization, it's often spread throughout the community or the people that are participating in that project or that application. Ownership. So for instance, let's think of something like Fortnite, where you play this game, it's free, which is really cool, but you might have spent tens or hundreds of dollars on these skins. For instance, I have a kid and I thought I was saving money by getting Fortnite for free, but we now spend more money every year on skins than we would on the game, buying it every year. The problem though, when you have these types of interactions, is that you purchase the skin and then you don't really have any way to do anything with it after that. So you spend $100 or $1,000, and then when you decide to stop playing the game, all of that money is going to the platform and it's no longer there for anyone to kind of use. Another form of ownership that you could think of is with the social media platform itself. So you are creating all this content on YouTube. Any time of the day, they could decide to just shut down your account, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. Let's say you want to take that content that is now hosted on YouTube somewhere else and make it exposable via like an API, or just have other people like repurpose it and things like that. It's not really possible. Now they do have APIs that they control, but the APIs change. There's a lot of barriers to entry to use them, and they could shut them down at any time. The ownership of the platform itself also doesn't go to the creator. Again, like I mentioned, all that money, all that advertising money is going to the platform itself. They might cut you like a few pennies. Like I have, hundreds or tens of thousands of views on my YouTube channel, and I probably make around $70 or $80 a month off of that. So, a lot of the incentives are aligned to help the platform itself, become extremely successful, and not the creators. Portability kind of goes into that. Like if I create content somewhere, it lives in their platform. It isn't accessible to me. It's not very accessible to me, at least. I think the killer part of all this, though, is this idea of tokens and native payments. When you think of like web protocols, when the internet first came into existence and it became popular, you have web protocols that are completely decentralized, like HTTPS, FTP, all of these things. Everyone knows that they can use them. And if they create a website and they put them up, then everyone in the entire world can access them, because these are truly decentralized protocols. A couple of things that were never built into the internet, though, were native payments and state. So therefore, we have a lot of these centralized versions of payments in state that have come around. So like AWS, GCP, all of these database platforms that have a centralized way of storing data. And then payments are probably the most complex part of the internet, though they shouldn't be, because it's digital, right? Like we should have a digital way to send payments peer-to-peer without any intermediary. But instead, what we have are companies like PayPal that just randomly shut down people's accounts and stop their money from being available. If anyone wants to sign up for one of these, they have to turn over paperwork. Sometimes it takes hours and days. It's a huge pain, and that's just for a single platform. Imagine dealing internationally in the international world that we live in today. It's not ideal at all. So native payments, or AKA cryptocurrency, being built into the platform itself opens the door to so many interesting possibilities. And people are starting to kind of really realize that, I think, in the last couple of years, but especially I think this year. And then smart contracts. Smart contracts are the essence of what software engineering is. In my opinion, it's kind of like, when you think of what software engineers do, we automate things and we abstract away intermediaries. We are building things that improve efficiency. Smart contracts can do this in a way that we've never seen before. So for instance, if you a really good example is like banks. Why do we need, I don't know, like uncountable hundreds or thousands of banks, each one of them generating billions of dollars of revenue that flows into the banks? All they're providing is a platform for the exchange of money. What if we could abstract all of that away with code? Smart contracts actually make that happen. So now you see DeFi protocols that are doing more money in transactions with a team of 10 people than you see happening in banks or financial institutions with teams of tens of thousands of people. The payroll on these DeFi protocols is probably 1% or 0.5% or less than that of these massive teams of companies that are doing it the old way. And therefore, you're kind of like automating away a lot of the inefficiencies there. And you're also saving money for the end user. And dependable, trustless, robust infrastructure. Decentralized infrastructure means that you have more uptime because you have multiple nodes running that you can interact with. There is no single point of failure. And then finally, self-sovereign identity. We don't have a ton of time to kind of like talk about all this, but this is a really interesting idea around being able to kind of like have your own, have control of your identity and be able to take it everywhere with you and change it as you like. So instead of having to sign up into every single application individually and they all store your data on their servers, instead you create a single identity on chain somewhere. And then every application that needs to access that can just access that place that you have your identity information saved. And anytime you want to change it, you can just change it in a single place. And you can decide what information they can see, what information they can't see. And it just opens the doors to more ownership again. And a lot of these ideas I kind of have used from a talk I saw from Juan Benet, who is a very influential like Web3 person, but a lot of these ideas are kind of also some of my own ideas. So what are some decentralization examples that we see in the Web2 world already? Well, decentralizing news, like in the past, we would like go to a handful of news sites to get our news. Now we go to Twitter or we go wherever, and we now have hundreds of thousands or millions of people giving us news. So this is kind of decentralized news. Decentralizing hotels. In the past, we had a handful of places where we could stay. Now, anyone that has a open room can now sell that, and now there are a lot more opportunities for people to kind of be a hotel, quote unquote, hotel provider. But to me, the most interesting part of Web3 is decentralizing web infrastructure. Decentralizing web infrastructure basically means that protocols are being built using things like I would say, if you want to learn more about it, check into cryptoeconomic protocols that allow different web infrastructure that we're used to using be available in a decentralized manner. And the people that are participating in the network are actually getting not only the benefits of all of the whatever financial incentives that were there, but also the decentralized nature of it kind of goes into the whole ethos of Web3. And when you think about core infrastructure, what do you typically think about when you're building an app? So like, it really is very similar to what we're used to in Web2. You have compute, like think of something like Lambda or EC2. You have identity and authentication, which is just something that you typically need for most apps. You have data, you have storage, and you have web hosting. And data can be a combination of database and API. The only other thing that you add to this mix is smart contracts in the Web3 world. And smart contracts unlock the door to a lot of interesting use cases as well. And you're starting to see that in the Web3 world, there are actually decentralized versions of all of these things. So you have a decentralized compute with projects like Akash, a couple of other ones like ICP. You have identity and authentication. You see a few different approaches there. The Ethereum Foundation already is actually working on standardization here. There's Ceramic and IDX that allow you to do this as well. There are a handful of data ways to deal with data. That compute layer could be part of that, but also things like what we're working on with the Graph protocol. Storage, you have IPFS, you have a Filecoin and a handful of others. And then web hosting, Fleek and a few others. There are also, again, a few different teams working on that. So what we're going to basically do is kind of like look at the most basic example, like how do you build a dApp? And we want to kind of combine some of the ideas that I talked about. So when you build an app, like what do you typically need? You typically need like a stack. So for the app that we're building, I want to show you the dApp stack that I'm going to be working with. We have a client framework, and we're building out this thing full stack. So we have a client framework that's going to be React. We have the Ethereum development environment that's going to be Hardhat. We have the Ethereum client library that's going to be Ether.js. And then we have the wallet. And the wallet serves as not only the identity of the user, but also a way for us to deal with tokens. So that is MetaMask. A couple of ways that you can get going with building a dApp. You can use a boilerplate like Scaffold ETH, which has tons of different branches of different types of example applications that you can work with. There's also Create ETH app, which is more of a basic version of that last project I mentioned. And this is kind of maybe a better boilerplate if you're just looking to kind of get started to build out something custom. And then finally, the thing that we're going to be looking at today, or working with today, is off of this tutorial that I created called The Complete Guide to Full Stack Ethereum Development. And this is a really great way to kind of get up and running with building out a dApp. And this is what I'm going to be following today. So if you want to maybe build something like this yourself or follow along, you can find this tutorial. It's on dev.to. And you can probably just Google The Complete Guide to Full Stack Ethereum Development, and you'll find this here. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move some stuff around, and we're going to go ahead and do some live coding. So what I basically want to do is like set up a new project, create an Ethereum development environment, and deploy a smart contract, and then connect to it. We only have 30 minutes, so we want to work quick. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am in an empty directory. I'm just going to create a new React app, just like we typically would, or a Vue app or whatever. And we're going to go ahead and start from scratch, because you're going to see this isn't like terribly hard to get going with, because the developer experience has actually improved a lot, I think, from maybe, I wasn't here, but like 2 years ago, I hear it was a lot more pain in the butt. Hardhat is actually a really, really great tool, as you're going to see. So once we've created our app, I'm going to go ahead and change into this new directory. And we want to install some dependencies. So I'm just gonna like paste in all these dependencies. These are mainly for Ethereum, I'm sorry, for Hardhat and for Ethers. So Ethers is a client library that is, you can think of it as like the fetch of Ethereum, in the sense that it allows you to interact with an API. So like fetch, you might call an HTTP API. Ethers, you can interact with the blockchain. So that's the way I would think about it. And then Hardhat is a local development environment. I don't really know how to compare this in the Web 2 world, but basically when you're dealing with the smart contracts, you need to be able to write your smart contracts, compile them into machine readable code that that we can basically use in our client-side application. You also need to be able to deploy your code to the blockchain itself and set up a few other configurations. Hardhat kind of like puts all that together and just makes it really easy. And then most of these dependencies just have to do with both Hardhat and Ethers. So once that installs, we will initialize a new development environment. But while that's doing it, let's go ahead and open our text editor. Okay, so what we want to do now is we've installed our dependencies, we've created our app, we want to initialize an Ethereum environment. So what we can do is we can run npx hardhat, and this will go ahead and do all that for us. And it'll kind of walk us through the steps. So we're going to create a basic template. We want to use the project root that we're in. And then we also want to just, answer whatever to get ignored. Doesn't really matter in our case. Okay, so now we've initialized our development environment. So what does that actually mean? Well, if we jump back to our text editor, we'll see that we have a contracts directory. And this gives us an example smart contract to work with. So we should see that we have like a greeter, which is considered hello world, like greet hello. And then we also have a couple of other files. We have a scripts folder, and this will give us a script that we can deploy our contract to the blockchain using JavaScript. We also have a Hardhat configuration, and this is our development environment configuration. So here we can do all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to delete some of these comments and stuff that we don't need, because really all we need is this JavaScript object that we're going to be configuring. And this so far only defines the version Solidity. And now we're kind of ready to go. So what we want to do now is we want to update this configuration here. Because when you're working with the React, you can't import outside of the SRC directory. And when we compile our smart contracts, by default, it's going to put them like one level up, so we can define where we want those things to be compiled to. So we're going to basically say, okay, when we compile our smart contract and we have these artifacts that we're going to use in our front end app, just put them in the source directory. And that's kind of what we're defining here. And then there's also a configuration that we have to take into consideration, is that when we're working with MetaMask wallet, and we basically are going to be needing to connect to the network that our local Ethereum environment is running on, and kind of like taking a step back using Hardhat, we are actually going to be running a local Ethereum node. So we're going to be running our own like Ethereum network locally, you could think of. And just like an API that we're used to using in the past, where we have an HTTP endpoint, we also need like some endpoint to interact with our local Ethereum node, which is going to be localhost, 8545 or something like that. But when you're interacting with a blockchain, you have to define a chain ID, and it needs to kind of like not conflict with any other chain IDs. And the wallet we're using is MetaMask, and MetaMask is going to be, I think, defaulting to 1337. So therefore, we're going to set this up here. That's kind of going beyond the scope of really what I would want to talk about, but just if anyone was like wondering what that means, I don't want to just not say anything. So we're good there. So let's look at our smart contract. We're going to be writing our smart contract in Solidity, and actually we're just going to take this default one they give us because it's pretty good. If you've ever written like JavaScript classes, this should look straightforward, honestly. There's a few, of course, things that there are a handful of things that are Solidity specific, but the code itself should be fairly readable. Also, if you've written TypeScript, this should look, fairly readable to you. We basically have two functions. We have one function that is going to return a string that we have set here called greeting. And private just means it can only be read from with this value can only be exposed from within the smart contract. But as you see here in this function, we're returning it. We also have a function called set greeting, and this is going to be a function that changes the state of the contract. So by default, we're going to be kind of like setting the greeting when we deploy the contract by passing in a value to the constructor. The constructor will just take in a string and it sets the initial state of the contract, which will be set to whatever we pass in here. So this might be like hello world or whatever. So, we have the constructor sets the initial state. We have a function that returns the value of greeting, and then we have a function that updates the value of greeting. So that's kind of the overview of this contract. It's definitely a good hello world, I think, to kind of get started. And if we have time, we're also going to deploy a cryptocurrency, a token. So we have that done. So now we can compile our smart contract. So to do that, I'm going to go to my terminal and we're going to run npx hardhat compile. And if everything works well, we should see that this compiles a new directory called artifacts in our src directory. So let's open our text editor. And here we see that we have our artifacts. And these are what we're going to be, this is what we're going to be using in two different ways. We're going to be using this when we deploy our contract to the chain, and we're going to be using this in our client-side application when we read from the chain. A concept, and I know I'm going over a lot of things, but a concept that you are going to be using and needing to understand a little bit is this idea of an ABI. And an ABI stands for Application Binary Interface. And this allows us to have a JSON representation of the things that are happening in our contract. And the things that are happening in our contract right now are going to be, fetching that string. They're going to be like setting that string and things like that. So here you can kind of see, you don't really have to read any of this typically, but you basically see you have like a JavaScript representation, I would say, of our contract. That's kind of the best way I would put it. But you'll be importing that and kind of like using that later on. You don't really have to like be able to read the ABI yourself. It's just kind of a concept that you're going to be hearing about. So I figured I'd overview it. All right. So we have now, we've created our contract and we've compiled our contract. So now we want to do a couple of next steps. We want to start a local Ethereum node. We want to deploy our contract to it. And then we want to interact with it from our React app. So let's open a couple of more terminal windows. And the first thing I'll do is run our Ethereum node. And this is actually extremely simple. All we need to do is run npx hardhat node. And this starts a local Ethereum node. And it also gives us 19 different test accounts that we can work with. And each of these accounts are seeded with 10,000 ETH. Because when you're writing and reading, when you're writing transactions, you're going to be using ETH. So the fact that they give you 10,000 ETH makes it just, a way for you to be able to develop locally. And it gives us the private key because this is a way we can actually now use this account in our Ethereum wallet. All we need is that private key and we can now start interacting with, we can start using this account. So we have that. Now we'll go to the next steps. We want to deploy our contract. So if we go to our code, we have this sample script here, which I'm going to rename to deploy. And this is some JavaScript. So let's take a look at it. And let me delete all of these unnecessary comments and actually show you that it's not a ton of code. Okay. So in these 4 lines of code, we're deploying our smart contract to the Ethereum node that's running locally. So the first thing that this function does is And it's actually going to look in that artifacts directory that we configured here, and it's going to look for a contract called greeter. And you can see in our contracts that it has the same name. So that's kind of how we're getting that. So we're going to go ahead and get a reference to that contract, but this is actually going to be the ABI. And then we want to go ahead and just like wait for this to deploy. And we're passing in that initial state to our constructor of hello Hardhat. So maybe we'll just call this like hello world or something like that, just so we can kind of see that once we interact with it. So we're deploying our contract. The constructor takes in, this string, which we're calling hello world, and then we're going to be setting the state. And then now when we read that state, it'll be greeting. Once this has been deployed, we want to log out the contract address because we're going to need to know that address to interact with our smart contract. And typically in Ethereum projects, the address could almost be thought of as like the API endpoint. You need a combination of the network that you're interacting with and the contract address to kind of be able to send the transactions. So our network is going to be localhost and our contract address is going to be logged out right here. So that's all we need to do. Like we didn't really change, I didn't change anything. Actually, I just deleted the comments. All of that was like set up for us by Hardhat. So now I just want to deploy this to our local Ethereum node. And what should happen is like when this deploys, you should see that we have some logging happening up here. So I'm going to run npx Hardhat run, and then we're going to pass in the path to the scripts. And then I want to set the network as localhost. Because if I didn't set the network to localhost, it would, I think it defaults to mainnet. So like that would be like us Ethereum deploying to like mainnet, or maybe it's a default to something else, but either way, it doesn't default to localhost. So like using the script, we could also deploy this to literally the Ethereum main network. We could deploy this to an Ethereum test network. We can deploy this to wherever we would like. Another thing to keep in mind is like when you write a transaction to a blockchain, in our case, Ethereum, you have to pay some network costs. So that is typically known as like the gas cost. And where does this gas come from? Like, where does the money come from? Well, we can specify like which one of these addresses we want to deploy from in our deploy script. But if we don't do that, then it's just going to by default look for the very first one. So we're going to basically be deploying from this account. So it's going to take some of this ETH out of our account to use it to deploy. And next time we check our balance, it should be less than that. So this is going to be the private key that we use just so we can kind of like see how that works. So let me go ahead and run this. And we see that we have our logging done here, and we see that the contract was deployed successfully here. All right, so what we now can do is we want to import this account and we want to start using it. So the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to open Chrome. And here I have in this top right corner, you can see that I have an Ethereum wallet installed. And I have all these networks that I can switch between. So right now, like I'm typically on an Ethereum mainnet, and then you can like switch between accounts and stuff like that. But we want to use the local network. So all we have to do to connect our wallet to the local network is just check localhost. And I think localhost ships by default with the MetaMask. So we have localhost. We want to now import this new wallet. I'm sorry, this new account. So I can go to accounts and I can click import account, paste in the private key. And there we go. We see we have 10,000 ETH. So we're in that account and we can now start using it. Let me see here. Actually, I need to use this account because I need to use account 0 because this is where we deployed from. So let me just import one more account. There we go. And I was wondering why we had 10,000. We should have 9,999 because we used some gas to deploy. All right, so we have that. What we want to now do is interact with this from our React app. So I'm going to open my React app. I'm going to go to app.js. And I'm going to go ahead and start writing some code. And this is going to go quite fast because we only have about 10 minutes left. And I want to kind of like test all this stuff out. We're importing use state from React for local state. We're importing ethers as the client library to call the smart contract. And then we're importing this ABI from artifacts/contracts/greeter.sol/greeter.json. So that was the ABI I showed you earlier. We also need to create a reference to our smart contract address. So I'm going to go to my terminal and copy this address that we deployed to. You can probably program. I mean, you can easily programmatically like add this to your app just by kind of like doing a file service write to some file. That way you could just import it and it would be dynamic. That would probably be easier. Next, we're going to go ahead and create a app component, and we're going to create some local state. We want to have the greeting variable, and we want to have a way to set the greeting locally in our local state. Next, we want to be able to connect to the Ethereum wallet itself, because we need a way to read that user's address. So we're going to basically, we need a way, not only to read their address, but to kind of like have access to their wallet. And this is a completely new concept if you've never used something like Ethereum. But basically, if someone has a wallet like MetaMask installed, there's going to be a global called Ethereum injected into their into the global scope. So anytime someone's using one of these wallets, you should be able to see window.ethereum. It should be available. So we basically are going to ask them to, if they have MetaMask installed, to go ahead and give us their account information. And this is kind of like what this function is doing. Now, if they don't have Ethereum wallet installed, this will error out. So you probably want to do like some try catch here in production. You wouldn't want to just call it like it is. All right, so that's going to basically allow us to interact with their, their wallet. The next thing we want to do is we're going to have a function that fetches the greeting. And this is going to basically be calling the greet function here. So this is going to be doing that. So we first make sure that they do have an Ethereum wallet installed. So we are doing that that try catch here. And then we're going to basically be creating what is known as a provider. And a provider is an API that allows us to interact with their wallet. You can use a provider to read information, and you can use a provider to create what's known as a signer that will sign a transaction to write to a contract. So you typically are using a provider or a provider and a signer. And without going into too much details, Ethers provides like a really nice abstraction over doing that. So all we need to do is basically say we want to have like what type of provider that we want, and we have to pass in the window.ethereum scope. We then get a reference to the contract itself by using ethers.contract, and we're passing in 3 arguments. We pass in the address of our contract, we pass in the ABI, and then we pass in the provider that we created here. And then now we can just basically call and interact with that contract. So here we're saying contract.greet. You could call any function at this point because you have a reference to that contract, and now we can start talking to the contract. So that's reading, and next we want to do the writing. So the writing is going to be called set greeting. Set greeting does very similar stuff. We first want to make sure that the user has typed in a greeting into the user interface. So like if they haven't, we just return. We then make sure that we're like getting an access to their account first, and authenticating them, you could think of. We then do the provider and then the signer, like I mentioned before. We then interact with their contract the same way we did before, and then we update, or we don't really update. We then fetch the greeting again to log it out to make sure that that's been done. So this is kind of like reading from the smart contract. This is writing to the smart contract. And the rest is like not really specific to Ethereum, it's just React. So we have some really basic user interface here. We have a button that fetches the greeting. We have a button that sets the greeting. And we have an on-change handler that allows us to change the local state. So when we call set greeting, there is an actual greeting to update. So yeah, so it's basically a really basic form where we can allow a user to like read information off of the chain and write information to the chain. So with that being said, let's test this out. I'm going to open up another window here. And we want to interact with our Ethereum project. And oh, it looks like I didn't do export. And if we finish this, I think I have time to just do a quick demo of like a token, because that's really, to me, the most interesting part when you start dealing with actual tokens. So I'm going to open my console and we want to start interacting with it. So if I go to my Ethereum node, I'm just going to clear that out. I want to call like fetch greeting. We see that we have hello world coming back, which is exactly what we expect. And you also see that there's been some logging here. So it looks like we have that contract call. So Ethereum node is like recognizing that there has been an interaction. And now we want to set the greeting to something else. So I want to say hello from webinar. And this should be pretty cool because we should see our Ethereum wallet open up. We want to go ahead and say, okay, this is the account that we want to interact with, or that is the account, whatever. This is the account I want to use. And then now it's going to actually charge us some Ethereum because we're writing a transaction. And this is kind of like how most blockchains work, or I would say all blockchains work. You have to pay some type of like gas fee. And I think that Ethereum is like in a place where it's starting to become a little too expensive to do certain transactions. And you're seeing a lot of interesting scaling stuff happening within Ethereum. So you have these layer twos that reduce the transaction costs to like fractions of a penny. You also have some scaling solutions that are being like built into Ethereum over the next 6 to 8 months. But you also have other blockchains that will allow us to basically do all the stuff we just did now with smart contracts and everything that have much less gas fees. So all these things are happening right now. So there isn't like a perfect solution for everything just yet, but like you typically choose the right tool for the right job. That's just kind of my brief overview of my thoughts around this, because you typically you use a blockchain not the same way as you do a database, I guess, is the main thing to take into consideration. This is like a demo purpose to kind of show you, but I think you have to understand the ecosystem to understand how to do and what to do in certain situations. So we should now click confirm. Oh, you know what? I need to reset my account because I was doing some stuff before I started this. I have basically tested this out and I didn't reset the let's try this again, the knots. So all right, so I'm gonna call set greeting, and there we go. We've reset the greeting. So we have greeting from webinar. So if I click fetch greeting, we see greeting from webinar, and I can say hello world again. And now when we fetch the greeting, we see the new greeting. And if we go to our chain, we'll see that we've kind of like done all this stuff. So we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to try to do a quick demo of a token because this is like the next interesting thing to me. And then I'm going to try to take some questions. So this will be very fast. I'm going to go ahead and create a new contract. I'm going to create a very naive token. This is going to be a cryptocurrency called Nader Dabit token. I'm going to set the total supply as 100,000 or maybe 1 million. And I'm writing all this token code from scratch. And we have, what, 25 lines of code. You don't even have to do this. There's actually libraries that are out there that allow you to kind of take what is the standard known as ERC20 and mint a token with even less code than this, and it's even more secure than this. That's covered in my tutorial. But for this example, so we don't have any like code that we're importing, we're kind of doing some basic stuff here where we're basically having a function, and in the constructor, we're setting the treasurer of the contract is the person that deployed this. So when I deploy this from a contract, I'm going to receive these 1 million tokens. I have a function, and this allows you to transfer tokens from one account to the other account, where we're basically just changing the ownership of this token. And then we have a function called balance of that allows us to read the number of tokens that owner has. So we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to continue to go too much into that. But let's now go ahead and create or update our deploy function. And we want to basically just like kind of copy this. And I'm going to, instead of saying greeter, I'm going to say token. And we don't need to have a constructor. Oh, you know what? I actually do need that. I need to, this is the constructor I need to get rid of here. All right. And we're going to say token.deployed. And then we're going to console.log the token address. And let's go ahead and try to compile and deploy that. And let's go ahead and try to deploy that. And it looks like I'm missing constructor. Maybe it does take a constructor. Oh no, I'm probably messed something up in my deploy script. Oh, okay. This needs to be token. All right, so we have our token and our greeter contracts are now both deployed. So what I should be able to do now is like go in and see this token in my wallet. So if I go here and I go to assets and I click add token, I see that we have this token symbol is NDT, Nader Dabit token. And we didn't set any decimals. And now that I see I have these 10,000 tokens. Now, if this had been deployed to mainnet, then you could actually start having your own cryptocurrency and sending it around and using it within whatever example, whatever use case that you have. The last thing that we want to do is I'm just going to like paste in a massive amount of code into my UI just so we can interact with it from our front end because I don't have time to walk through all the code. But it's kind of like really basic stuff, similar to what we did before. So I want to go ahead and get the balance of my wallet. Oh, I didn't pass in the address. So let me do that real quick. All right, so we should be able to call get balance and see that we have 10,000. And now I want to send tokens to my friend over here. I'm going to copy his address. I'm going to say the account ID is that, and the amount is like 10,000. And now if I call get balance, my balance is 990,000. And if I now switch over to this other account, oops, I should have connected. Then my balance is 10,000 because I now have switched those over. And I think that's it. Like we have 5 minutes and I do want to take some Q&A. So yeah, I know I went through quite a bit. If you want to learn more of this at a slower pace, then walk through that that tutorial that I linked, and it kind of has a video that goes along with it, and you should be able to kind of learn at your own pace there.
Thanks for that. That was honestly super interesting. when you started off, it was a kind of a bit overwhelming, as you said. It's quite a quick talk, but really interesting. Like myself and a few of the other panelists have a few questions actually. I don't see any other Q&A questions coming in at the moment. So if you guys have anything, I see one coming in. But yeah, I'm just going to get started because we don't have too much time left. One question was basically, and I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but what are the real world applications of this? Because obviously it costs ETH or whatever currency you're using to, or token you're using to actually do these calls. So maybe you can give us something that's maybe not money related, as a real world example of building something like this.
Yeah, so like some of the stuff that's happening right now that's kind of interesting to me are the gaming applications of this. So like there was recently like the head of gaming on YouTube kind of like had this tweet and a couple of like responses below it that are kind of like how he's talking about integrating like NFTs, which are basically a form of a token that lives on a chain into gaming. And one of the ways that's being used today is with Axie Infinity. So Axie Infinity is an online gaming, and it's similar to kind of like Fortnite in the sense that you can buy skins. But the main difference is that like once you buy a skin or buy an in-game item, you actually own that item, and the value continues to like hold its own. And let's say that you decide to kind of like, you know, leave the game, you can put that item and sell it to other people. Or if you want to stay like within the game and you think that it's going to like be more popular in the future, you just might hold on to it because the value increases. But like buying into it now like gives you more ownership. And I think that like the ideas around like how that has been working, and you just, I think I mentioned or not, but within like the last month, they did like $780 million in sales and transactions. And the most interesting part of that is that like most of that ownership, most of those items stays within the community that's there. So when you spend this money, it's not just going to the platform, you're retaining ownership. So the idea is around the ownership of the people buying into it. But the most interesting, I think, is going to be when there's a platform that makes it more accessible for creators and buyers to both participate at an equal level. So like the most, I would say like popular like use case of that, like as of today, is in the art world. You know, NFTs are like very like in the news and stuff like that. And when I first started reading about and learning about them, I kind of thought they were stupid. So it took me a while to kind of see like why people would be interested in this stuff. But you're seeing like communities and DAOs and stuff that form around creators and consumers, where you're, for instance, like there was this artist recently, a week ago, maybe. He's a JavaScript developer / generative artist. He created a collection of NFTs, put them on OpenSea, and they sold out within a few minutes. All of that money he actually programmed into the contract to take like a percentage out of every future sale as well. But all of that money like went to his communities that he's been learning from. So the generative art community made like $3 million. And then it was generating like hundreds of thousands of dollars every week after that. So combine, and then the people that kind of like bought into that were kind of now part of the community, and like, you know, the ownership aspect is there. OpenSea recently overtook Etsy in volume. They've had $195 billion day in transactions a couple of days ago. I'm sorry, $195 million. I may have said billion. 195 million in transactions. But the idea is the seeing that momentum is like kind of wild to me. And I think the big deal is going to be the next big deal is going to be social media. I truly think that someone's going to like hit the nail on the head, combining the ownership and the creativity to build out like a social media platform that allows creators and consumers to retain more ownership of the platform itself. Of course, like the ones that are really initially became popular for the use cases are DeFi, so decentralized finance, creating protocols that kind of abstract away the banking systems of the past, lowering the barrier to entry for people to invest. So in the past, you might have needed to have a lot of like money and a lot of connections and a lot of like intelligence and all these other things to kind of just be able to participate in financial markets. Now, if you have $100, you can go and buy in on something and you can earn rewards on it. You can like take it out whenever you want. There's all these interesting protocols, and like the next wave of like where that DeFi area to me is headed towards. It's kind of like combining DeFi and NFTs and real estate markets. So like to me, the ideas around attaching like an NFT to a building in New York that's like $20 million, for example, and fractionalizing it and allowing anyone to be able to just buy in $100 or $1,000 and also have a liquid market where they could then sell that at their, at their whim. Almost like an exchange, like a stock exchange, but instead for pretty much anything, really brings a new like paradigm of investing, but also lowers the barrier to entry to investing to everyone in the world. So like if I think a really interesting thing is going to happen in my neighborhood and I don't have $1 million to like go and do all this paperwork and all this other stuff, I might be able to just buy into it and see what happens and things like that. I mean, really, I think that every application that you see today in some way can kind of like have this built into it. It just kind of like depends on like what areas.
Sure, yeah, I can see you're quite passionate about it as well. It's super interesting to me. I'm not a big fan of NFTs, as you said. I still don't quite understand them, but it definitely seems like there's a huge movement behind this at the moment. So
yeah, and it's still early. Like a lot of the questions like haven't been answered for like every single use case. A lot of experimentation is happening. Like for instance, one of the things that is interesting to me, and the reason I kind of got interested in it at the time I did, is that Ethereum was running on and is running on something called proof of stake, which is an environmentally unfriendly consensus mechanism. But they've actually moved a test network that they've been developing for a couple of years to something called proof of stake, which is environmentally friendly consensus. And they have planned to merge proof of work, the existing Ethereum consensus into proof of stake in the next few months. So I think like when that happens, a lot of people that had like myself reservations about the environmentally impactful like issues there, it actually kind of flips it on its head because it now becomes cheaper and less environmental and more environmentally friendly to transfer digital assets on chain instead of in real life. So now I think a lot of artists are starting to see the benefits of that. And I think there's going to be a ton of collaboration between artists, influencers, creators, and like really it's exploded over the last month or two. Excited to see where it goes next.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a very interesting place. You were talking about games. I know, sorry, we don't have too much time, but there's actually a game that I've been watching. Okay, that's good news. I'll just keep going now. But there is one called Ember Sword, which is looking pretty cool. Kind of an MMO online sort of thing built on, I think, the Ethereum network as well. So that should be quite interesting. I'm going to go to the next question because we have a few now, and hopefully we can get through these. Someone's asked, Yeltser's asked, do you know if developing with the Binance Smart Chain works in a similar way? What are the differences with Ethereum?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the cool, interesting part about what I just demoed is that we were using the Ethereum virtual machine, EVM. And EVM was really the first like widely accepted smart contract platform. And it was built on Ethereum. And using the development framework of Hardhat that I used, using Solidity, you can actually also develop for BSC and many other blockchains. So you learn Solidity once, you learn Hardhat once, you can build for all of these other blockchains. I'm not a huge fan personally of BSC. I feel like it's somewhat centralized, but I do feel like it has a place because you're now seeing really large interests from massive like banks and financial, not banks, but massive like financial institutions of government, financial institutions in other parts of Asia that are now looking to adopt BSC as maybe a mechanism for them to deal with digital tokens within their government. So like if BSC creates partnerships with all of these major governments within Asia and possibly in the world, then it will have so much adoption and you'll see like a massive like increase in people developing on it. But yeah, you learn Solidity once, you learn Hardhat and all these other like things I went over once, and you can build on like a dozen or so really popular blockchains. Not all of them use EVM, but a lot of them do.
Interesting. Okay, so it's a little bit like the front-end community where you learn JavaScript, you can basically take you a couple of weeks to hop into anything. Okay, that's very cool. Interesting. One more question from Yordi. Web3 seems to suit new digital companies, but how can classical commercial customers benefit from Web3? We obviously want to build dApps for our customers in the near future.
I think if you're like an agency, you can pivot fairly easily. I think it'll be hard for companies that are using the traditional model to pivot if their platform is kind of built in the Web2 world. The couple of ways that I see people have done this or are doing this is that smart contracts allow you to program into the actual contract payments and also residuals. So instead of the platform making money off of advertising, if you build a really good platform and you programmatically like take a cut of like 0.1% of every transaction that happens between participants, then you generate a massive amount of revenue. So just like the artists that are creating these NFTs that are programming in 0.5% of every transaction between parties that goes to their address, you can do that within companies. So let's say you have an idea and you want to build a big company around it, and you're not going to be like charging people to use it. They're going to use it for free, but they're going to like build communities within it. They're going to be transacting with each other. If you build a platform that works, then you're going to like have a massive amount of adoption, and then you can take a stake of the transactions that do happen. Twitter, like Jack Dorsey is like starting to become really, I think, interested in building a decentralized Twitter, because there are a couple of teams that are out there building a decentralized Twitter, and he's seen that those discussions happening. He's also kind of like interested in crypto and stuff. He actually just launched a huge initiative and team to build a decentralized Twitter. So like when Jack Dorsey like sees this as like a threat, it's obvious that that it's starting to gain the attention of some of these larger tech companies. But I don't think a tech company like Twitter is going to pull it off, because I mean they could pull it off. But I feel like something like this is going to come organically from the community that have been doing this, and like this is what they've been doing already, and they understand how these things work. Someone's going to come up with like a new paradigm, different than what we've ever seen before, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, Twitter is something that is not too complicated in itself these days, at least to implement. And what you're saying is completely true. I mean, I myself have been with a friend of mine looking into doing something similar to Twitter and decentralizing that. I mean, especially with what you've just shown us is it does not seem that complicated. It would take a little bit of while to like get the community going and get back like people actually backing you, but it's yeah, it doesn't seem like it's too far away. We have one more question, so we won't take too much time. A question from Ko Turk in the chat. So from what you've built now, I assume that's what he's going for, is how do you actually deploy that to mainnet after you've finished testing and building that?
Yeah, so we worked in my project in a file called hardhat.config.js. There is a key value pair that you can set for networks. So all you would need to do would be to set a network of whatever the RPC endpoint of the Ethereum mainnet is, or it might be able to do that by default if I forgot, but you can see it in the docs. So you just set that network, and then when you run that deploy script, instead of saying -- network equals localhost, you would say -- network equals mainnet. The main difference though is that when you're deploying to a mainnet, you actually need real Ethereum to do that. So what you need to give Hardhat is your private key. And in your Ethereum wallet, like MetaMask, you can actually go and export that private key. So you export the private key for the address that you want to deploy from, and you reference that in the deploy script. You have to be very careful to never push that private key to GitHub or to expose it ever in plain text or anything. So the best idea is to use it as an environment variable, because if anyone gets that private key, they can drain your entire account. So that's something to keep into consideration.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, I've heard people that have pushed it up and like lost like tens of thousands of dollars, and I'm sure it's even been worse than that.
Yeah. When you initially mentioned the you said a company was making about OpenSea, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, OpenSea. Yeah.
You said they made like a billion initially. I think you misspoke, but
yeah, they did.
I was
what they
thinking
did
that must have been immediate.
over
Like,
1 billion in sales in 1 month recently, like, which was kind
okay.
of huge. And they did a 195 million in 1 day a couple of days ago, and then they overtook Etsy. Like those three events all happened in the last month, and I thought they were kind of bullish.
It's quite ridiculous because you see unicorn companies that will pop up over like a year of startup ventures and doing whatever they need to, and it used to take a year or two for companies to get there, and now you're seeing things happen in a month, 2 months.
And they make 2.5% on every single transaction. So I don't know what the valuation would be, but let's say that $1 billion, what is that, like $25 million or something like that. So in like 1 year, that's like 300 and something $million. So if let's say they have a $300 million a year run rate, like I don't know what that would value them at. So I guess like 30 billion or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good investment.
But honestly, NFTs, like it's going through a hype right now. So this could be a big bubble.
Yeah.
Like it could completely crash and things could like happen. And I'm sure that will happen at some point. I don't know like when or where or what it's going to look like. But I think the important thing about it is that you're seeing that there is something there. So you'll probably see like up and down, and it'll start steadying off. And then you're going to see people understand how to like actually integrate these ideas of ownership into the interactions that we're having like on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's going to be the value. And again, it's still very early in this space. So like all these questions are not quite answered.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for it to normalize, right? This stuff's all very new. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to close it up now. I think we've gone a bit over time. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's super interesting. One more thing, I really like the Banksy behind you. Very cool. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. We will have another talk next month from one of our own developers at Frontmen. Dave Bitter will be talking about dynamically generating open graph images using Next.js serverless. So if you guys are interested in that, remember you're all welcome to join. Share the link with your friends. That'll be up on meetup.com within the next 2 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining. Thanks again, Nader. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for checking this out. Hope you enjoyed it.
Cool. Thanks so much. Hope you have a great day.
Bye, you too.
Cheers, everyone.